Now we're moving on to part two, and I want to show you a few graphics. So for each one of these graphics, I just want you to pull out a generalized statement about each one. This one is looking at main causes of death in low-income countries. Now I know the graph itself is a little dated. However, the percentages remain about the same today. So I just left the graph the same way because the percentages really haven't changed. And what we're looking at is that about 45% of causes of death in low income countries are due to infectious disease. So you don't need to necessarily know all the different categories, all the other categories, but what I want you to pull from this is that the majority of deaths in low income countries are due to infectious disease. Okay, the majority of deaths in low income countries are due to infectious disease. This next image shows a similar pattern. This is main causes of premature death. So this is for ages 0 to 44. And again, we have a variety of different categories. However, infectious disease is at 48%. So again, the generalized statement here is that the main cause for premature death is infectious disease. And this is actually global. So this isn't necessarily just low income countries. So just under 50% or half are due to infectious disease. This particular image is called The Death of a Child, and this is looking at the percentage of women aged 15 to 49, married or previously married, who have had at least one child die. And if you look at this, the numbers are quite staggering. And they range from, what do we have, 13% all the way up to 52%. So most of them are in about the 20% to 30% range. So that's basically saying that 20 to 30% of women age 15 to 49 can expect to have at least one child die. So that's the generalized statement there. And in most cases, that is due to health issues. So either infectious disease, inadequate access to health care, vitamin deficiencies, malnutrition, typically health-related issues. So about 20 to 30% of women, particularly in the developing world, which are the countries listed here, can expect to have at least one child die. Now this particular graphic shows large outbreaks. And this particular map defines outbreaks as more than 10,000 cases. Okay, so again, remember, it has to be quite a large number because it's relative to what could be expected for that disease in a particular country. So these are selected outbreaks of more than 10,000 cases in a 20-year period. And what I want you to get from this particular map is just that it can occur anywhere. So you don't necessarily need to know all these diseases. Okay, we're going to go through a few diseases that I want you to know a little more about. So you don't need to necessarily know all these diseases or write down everything that's in all those little boxes. I just want you to pull from this particular image that large outbreaks occur everywhere. There aren't that many parts of the world that escape large outbreaks. So even in the US, there's hepatitis C. Then in South America, we have cholera, meningitis. You know, in Africa, also meningitis, anthrax. I mean, we have Rift Valley fever, dengue fever, hepatitis A. I mean, all sorts of outbreaks. And these are diseases that are fairly well known. so they weren't necessarily surprising because we knew of these diseases. We know they still exist. But I just want you to have a sense of how common outbreaks can be. Again, this is just a 20-year period. Now, what's even more surprising is this next one, because these are unexpected outbreaks. And these are examples of emerging and re-emerging infectious disease. And this is just a 5-year period. Now, these aren't necessarily large numbers, so we're not looking at 10,000 cases here. I think if there was a very high number, they would have put it here on the map. So we don't have the exact number, but again, it would be a higher number than what would be expected for that particular disease in that particular area. And here we see an even larger distribution across the globe. So these are diseases that we know of, okay, that have existed, and diseases that we thought were long gone. Diseases that we thought were essentially dead diseases that no longer existed. And we see them re-emerging. And this is happening every day. And some of these are brand new diseases, so emerging diseases. So there are several on this list that I had not even heard of. So we have brand new ones, we have ones that we knew of, and then we have those that we thought no longer existed. So again, there aren't many spots on the planet that are not touched in some way. And again, this is just a 5-year period. Now, in some cases, we have a sense of why some diseases are re-emerging, and in other cases, we don't. One thing that does play a role is vaccinations. It's estimated that better coverage could prevent, this is an estimate, 1.6 million deaths, this is per year, in children that are under 5 years of age. So this is a relatively inexpensive method that could make a big dent in particularly infectious disease. Now, I know vaccinations are a controversial topic in this country. In other countries, particularly those that are dealing with diseases where there are vaccines available, it's a little bit of a different story, where vaccines in many cases make a huge difference in life expectancy and the number of children that die from that particular disease. So we're not going to necessarily get into the controversy of vaccinations. I know there are some that believe that vaccines can lead to other sorts of medical conditions. There's no doubt that continued research is needed with vaccinations, and they have definitely improved over the years, and some of those issues have been addressed. They're not all perfect. We don't have all the answers, and as I said, more research is constantly needed. But I don't think anyone would argue that they have saved literally millions of lives over the years. And with discontinuing vaccinations, we are likely to see the reemergence of diseases that we thought were long gone. So that's something we need to consider as well. Do we want a resurgence of diseases such as polio or leprosy in this country? Because these diseases are alive and well in other parts of the world, but have more or less been eradicated in the United States. Even in the United States, in the last few years, we've seen increases in diseases that we hadn't seen at these rates for years, such as measles, because of some people choosing not to vaccinate. So that, of course, is a personal choice, and like I said, is a controversial topic. However, there are implications to those choices that we need to take into consideration as well. But when we're talking about the developing world, where a large percentage, millions of people are dying from diseases that have vaccines, it no doubt plays a huge role in controlling that problem. Okay, we're now going to move on to particular diseases that I want to discuss. And the first one that I want to discuss is malaria. And we're going to talk about malaria first because of its huge impact. About 40% of the world population is at risk. And you can see in the map here the distribution of malaria. And it has large distribution just about everywhere in the equatorial zones of the world. So that doesn't necessarily mean 40% of the world has malaria, but they're in areas where it either exists or it could possibly exist. The vector is the mosquito, in particular the Anopheles mosquito. You can see a picture of it there, and it has a very distinctive look. It has some stripes on its back. And it is considered the largest killer. I know a lot of times we think of AIDS, but actually malaria has the largest impact, not only with deaths, but also the burden of disease, which we're going to get to on the next slide. We're not going to get into in this class all the specific types of malaria, but I do want you to know that there are several. So like many diseases, there are different strains. Some are more deadly than others. And there are some strains where you can get the malaria parasite, take some medication, and you're cured. And then there are other types where you actually have it for a very long period of time, in many cases the rest of your life, where it stays dormant in your system. So children are particularly at risk. Pregnant women and non-immune adults. There are some people that believe that if you get malaria as a child and you live, that's the key component there, and you live through it, that you do develop a certain type of immunity. That hasn't been proven, but there is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that. So malaria is a parasite. So again, a person will have malaria. The mosquito, the Anopheles mosquito, will bite someone that has malaria and then transmits it to the next person it bites. The mosquito is needed because the parasite grows and matures in that mosquito. So it is an important component of the chain. And when you get malaria, you'll have flu-like symptoms, high fever. And like I said, in some cases, depending on the strain, you can take medication and you'll be cured. But in many cases, you'll have it for the rest of your life. So you just have to control the symptoms when you have an episode or an outbreak of malaria, and then it will remain dormant in your system. And it can remain dormant in your system for years. And then what typically happens is when your immune system is compromised in some way, it will come out of dormancy. So if you're sick with something else, or you're under a lot of stress, or your immune system is compromised for whatever reason, it will then come out. So I had a friend, for instance, that got malaria while he was the Peace Corps in Papua New Guinea. And it was always right before finals where he would have an episode of malaria because he was under stress. So sometimes it's not the most convenient time for an outbreak. And I know someone else that contracted malaria as a teenager, had an episode when he first contracted it, never had an episode again, 20, 30 years later. So it all depends on that particular individual and their particular immune system, which will dictate how many episodes they may have in their lifetime. What's most important is that you recognize what it is and you know what it is, so that when you have an episode, it can be treated, because the episodes can be quite severe, and you can have fevers, 104, 105, 106, where you have to be packed down with ice. So it can be extremely dangerous if you don't know what you're dealing with. Okay, we're going to pick up with malaria in part 3.